You also touched on how the college basketball scandal could eventually touch upon college football. Would you mind telling me and the listeners here how you think that might actually play out?
Yeah, I just think the added scrutiny of there's so much more attention on it. I think the difference with college basketball is you have these, street agents who are connected to actual agents. And because there's less of a developmental piece in this. A five-star guy in college basketball is probably going to be, a lottery pick caliber guy, whereas you have five-star guys, for instance, the year Rosen and Darnold were coming out of high school for a while, the number one ranked overall player in all of college football recruiting was a guy named Ricky Town. He's been to like 4 or 5 schools. The point being, it's way more speculative. But having said all that, talking to coaches, I talked to a coach who spent a long time in the SEC, and he said that it's dirtier now than it was 10, 15 years ago. What you have happen, though, is you have a lot of people where they're boosters. They might not even be big boosters, but the players are way more accessible now when they're recruits because of social media. You can DM them. You see who, anybody who follows your favorite team, you follow the tight ends coach. You know who they are recruiting because you see who they're kind of following. And then all of a sudden it's like those kids are out there, they're commodities, and all these people want to feel like they're invested in the program, and so they feel like everybody's doing it, which I think you see the example of college basketball where it feels like all these big programs, everybody is kind of tainted. And so I think that's the part where it spreads out, and I think it scares a lot of people. Who is talking to who? And I think the question is it plausible deniability when it comes to the actual head coach or people on down of how dirty it really is?
Well, I mean, and part of the conversation that I'm hearing based off of, again, the college basketball scandal that's playing out in real time with football is that the one and done in college basketball that is front and center in the conversation has put into the spotlight the fact that kids have to play 3 years after their high school graduation to be eligible for the draft and obviously the combine that's going on this weekend, and how that might be something that should be revisited by the NFL, which says the reason why it's there is because kids might not be ready to compete with grown-ass men that go down in the National Football League, 30-year-old guys that'll take your head off because you think that they think that you're taking food off of their table. Where do you stand on that subject, Bruce?
I think we were talking about the 1% of 1%. Now, it's not to say kids wouldn't think. There's a lot of kids whose heads are so out of whack from the recruiting process that they think, and some of them, physically look kind of like they would be NFL players. I go back to. They have this event called the Opening every year. Nike brings in the top 180 rated, high school recruits who are going to be seniors, and it's on the Nike campus and in Portland. And you'll see a lot of NFL players around, like Aaron Rodgers showed up at the, Desmond comes out there. A lot of guys, who are Nike guys come in. And there was a player who was ended up as the number one ranked guy in that particular class and was a defensive lineman from Florida who ended up going to Auburn. And I thought, and me and a couple other people, including some guys who were like former NFL players, they thought he was an NFL player walking around. I mean, he looked the part. He'd been in a weight room probably from the time he was in 8th grade. That he wasn't. If he had been one of those guys who'd been like, oh, I'll be a sub-package guy and I'll do well in the NFL. I mean, he's been kind of a bust. But physically, he looks the part. And everybody was telling him how great he was. I mean, you have guys like this who physically look the part, but just mentally, can they handle, it's a full-time job with grown-ups and you're trying to take their money. That's why almost none of them, I think, could handle it. And I'm not saying they couldn't stay around, but they would need to be coddled in ways that I just don't think, the NFL wants to deal with that. Maybe after 2 years, you may have a handful of guys who could handle it, but the direct, one and out, I mean, we're talking about a fraction of 1% that I think are like legit big time college football players. It's just not realistic.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.